Deep in the heart of the ancient, sprawling forest known as the Whispering Pines, where the moonlight barely pierced through the thick canopy of gnarled trees, there existed a hidden world, untouched by human civilization. This was the domain of the Ophiophaga, a race of werewolves whose existence had been shrouded in mystery for millennia. The Ophiophaga were not like the werewolves of human folklore, lone beasts cursed to transform with the full moon. No, they were a sophisticated civilization, with rituals and traditions as old as the forest itself. Their culture thrived in the shadow of the ancient pines, their cities woven into the very fabric of nature. Massive stone structures, covered in moss and entwined with vines, rose from the forest floor. These were their temples and council halls, where the elders gathered under the gaze of the full moon to deliberate on matters of grave importance. The Ophiophaga were nocturnal by nature, their society structured around the lunar cycle. On nights when the moon was at its fullest, they would gather in the Great Clearing, a vast open space surrounded by towering trees, where the moonlight bathed the ground in a silvery glow. It was here that they performed their most sacred rituals, communing with the ancient spirits of the forest, who were said to be their ancestors. But the most intriguing and unsettling aspect of the Ophiophaga was their ability to transform at will, not just under the full moon. Their transformation was not a curse, but a gift passed down through generations. They could shift seamlessly between their human and lupin forms, often blending the two in ways that were as beautiful as they were terrifying. Their human forms were striking, with sharp, predatory features and eyes that glowed faintly in the dark, while their werewolf forms were majestic and fearsome, therefore the color of the deepest shadows. Despite their fearsome nature, the Ophiophaga were a deeply spiritual people, believing that the forest was a living, breathing entity that must be revered and protected. They worshipped the Moon Mother, a deity said to have created them from the union of man and beast. The Ophiophaga believed that they were the guardians of the forest, tasked with keeping the balance between nature and the supernatural. For centuries, the Ophiophaga lived in peace, their existence unknown to the outside world. But recently, there were whispers among the elders of a prophecy that foretold the coming of a great darkness, an ancient enemy that had been slumbering beneath the forest floor for thousands of years. According to the prophecy, this darkness would rise during the blood moon, when the moon turned red as blood, and it would bring with it a plague that would destroy the forest and the Ophiophaga with it. As the time of the blood moon drew near, unease spread through the Ophiophaga like wildfire. The elders convened in the Temple of the Moon, a massive stone structure carved into the side of a mountain, where they consulted the ancient texts and communed with the spirits for guidance. The prophecy was clear: the blood moon would rise in 3 nights, and with it, the ancient darkness. In the midst of this growing fear, a stranger appeared at the edge of the forest, a human, dressed in the garb of a hunter, with eyes that burned with a strange, otherworldly light. The stranger claimed to be a wanderer, lost in the forest, but the Ophiophaga knew better. They could smell the taint of something old and malevolent on him, something that set their fur on end. The elders debated what to do with the stranger, who had come to them at such a perilous time. Some believed that he was a harbinger of the prophecy, sent to warn them of the coming darkness. Others were convinced that he was the darkness itself, disguised in human form. As the blood moon approached, the tension within the Ophiophaga civilization reached a boiling point. The stranger was brought before the elders in the Great Clearing, where he was questioned under the light of the moon. But the more they questioned him, the more elusive his answers became, and the more the sense of impending doom grew. On the night of the blood moon, as the moon began to rise, the stranger finally revealed his true nature. Before the gathered Ophiophaga, he transformed not into a werewolf, but into something far worse. His body twisted and contorted, his skin darkening and splitting as something ancient and terrible emerged. It was a creature of shadows and nightmares, a being from a time before the Ophiophaga, before the forest itself. As the blood moon bathed the forest in its crimson light, the creature let out a bone-chilling howl that echoed through the trees. The ground trembled, and the ancient trees began to wither and die. The Ophiophaga, caught between fear and duty, prepared to fight for their home, their civilization, and their very existence. But as they charged at the creature, they realized too late that this was no ordinary battle. The creature was a manifestation of the very darkness they had feared, a force that could not be fought with tooth and claw alone. As the Ophiophaga were engulfed in the creature's shadow, their fate remained uncertain. Would they find a way to vanquish this ancient evil, or was their civilization doomed to be swallowed by the darkness of the blood moon? The answers lay deep within the heart of the Whispering Pines, where the secrets of the Ophiophaga and their ancient enemy were buried long ago, waiting to be unearthed. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the blood moon hung high in the sky, its red glow casting eerie shadows that danced across the faces of the Ophiophaga. The creature of darkness, a twisted amalgamation of shadow and nightmare, loomed over them, its presence suffocating. The Ophiophaga warriors, their lupin forms bristling with fear and determination, lunged at the creature with a ferocity born of desperation. But their claws passed through it as if it were smoke, and their teeth found no purchase on its shifting, shadowy form. The creature let out another howl, a sound that resonated deep within the bones of the Ophiophaga, sending chills down their spines. From the depths of the forest, a low rumble began to build. The ground quaked beneath the feet of the Ophiophaga, and the ancient trees groaned as if in pain. The creature of darkness was drawing power from the forest itself, feeding on its life force. The Ophiophaga realized that their beloved forest, the source of their strength and the cradle of their civilization, was now being used against them. Elderthorn, the oldest and wisest of the Ophiophaga, stepped forward, his silver fur shimmering under the blood moon. His eyes, glowing with the light of countless full moons, locked onto the creature. With a voice that carried the weight of centuries, he began to chant in the ancient tongue of their ancestors, calling upon the spirits of the forest to aid them in their time of need. But the spirits did not answer. The connection between the Ophiophaga and the forest had been severed by the creature's malevolent presence. The realization struck the Ophiophaga with the force of a thunderclap. They were alone in this fight. As panic began to spread among the Ophiophaga, a voice soft but firm cut through the chaos. It was Leora, a young Ophiophaga, who had only recently completed her first transformation. Her human form was slender and graceful, with eyes that glowed a pale blue, reminiscent of the moon on a clear winter's night. She was not yet a warrior, but she possessed a sharp mind and a deep connection to the forest. "Leora, what are you doing?" Elderthorn's voice was laced with concern as he watched her step forward. "We can't fight this creature with force," Leora said, her voice steady. "It's too powerful, too ancient, but there might be another way." The elders exchanged wary glances. Leora was young, inexperienced, but there was something in her voice that made them listen. "The creature is drawing power from the forest, but the forest is also our source of strength," Leora continued. "If we can't fight the creature directly, maybe we can weaken it by severing its connection to the forest. But how?" One of the elders asked, skepticism in his tone. Leora hesitated, then spoke. "There is a place, deep within the forest, where the heart of the forest lies, a place where the ancient spirits are strongest. If we can reach it and perform the rite of severance, we might be able to cut off the creature's power." Elderthorn's eyes narrowed. "The heart of the forest is forbidden. No Ophiophaga has set foot there in centuries." "I know," Leora replied, "but the prophecy spoke of a great darkness, and this is it. If we don't try, we'll all be destroyed." The elders deliberated for what felt like an eternity, the creature's howls growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. Finally, Elderthorn nodded. "Very well, Leora. You will lead a group to the heart of the forest, but be warned the journey is perilous, and the rite of severance has not been performed in generations. We don't know what awaits you there." Leora nodded, determination etched on her face. She quickly gathered a small group of warriors, those who were swift and silent, able to navigate the treacherous paths that led to the heart of the forest. Among them was Kiran, a seasoned warrior whose loyalty to Leora was unwavering. As the group set out into the depths of the forest, the creature of darkness seemed to sense their plan. It let out a furious roar, and the shadows around it began to writhe and twist, forming into nightmarish shapes that pursued the Ophiophaga through the trees. The journey to the heart of the forest was grueling. The path was overgrown and treacherous, with roots that seemed to reach out to trip them and shadows that played tricks on their eyes. But Leora led the way with an unerring instinct, guided by a force she couldn't fully explain. After what felt like hours, they finally reached the heart of the forest, a clearing bathed in a soft, ethereal light. At the center of the clearing stood an ancient tree, its bark silver and its leaves shimmering with a faint glow. This was the heart of the forest, the source of its power. But as they approached the tree, a figure stepped out from behind it, a figure that made Leora's blood run cold. It was the stranger, the same one who had brought the creature of darkness to their world. But now, he was different, his eyes glowing with an even more malevolent light. "You think you can stop me?" The stranger sneered. "The forest belongs to me now. The Ophiophaga are nothing but a footnote in its history." Leora's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood her ground. "This forest will never belong to you. It is older than you, older than any of us, and it will never bow to darkness." The stranger laughed, a sound that echoed through the clearing. "You are foolish to think you can stop what's coming. The darkness has been unleashed, and there is no turning back." But Leora refused to back down. She closed her eyes and began to chant the words of the rite of severance, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. The other Ophiophaga joined in, their voices rising in unison. As they chanted, the ancient tree began to glow brighter, its light pushing back the shadows that had crept into the clearing. The stranger's expression twisted with rage as he realized what was happening. He lunged at Leora, but Chiron intercepted him, grappling with the stranger as the others continued the ritual. The ground beneath the tree began to tremble, and the light grew so intense that it was blinding. Leora felt a surge of energy pass through her, connecting her to the forest in a way she had never experienced before. The rite of severance was working, but it was also draining her, pulling her deeper into the heart of the forest's power. Just as the ritual reached its climax, the creature of darkness let out a final, ear-piercing scream. The shadows around it dissipated, and the forest began to heal, the ancient trees straightening and the withered plants coming back to life. But as the light from the tree began to fade, Leora felt a cold hand grip her heart. The stranger, weakened but not defeated, snarled at her. "This is not over, Ophiophaga. You may have won this battle, but the war has just begun." With those words, the stranger vanished into the shadows, leaving Leora and her companion standing in the now peaceful clearing. The heart of the forest had been saved, but the threat of the ancient darkness still lingered. As they made their way back to the great clearing, Leora couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The prophecy had been vague, but one thing was clear. The Ophiophagas' fight was far from over. Back in the village, Elder Thorn greeted them with relief and pride, but his eyes were shadowed with concern. "You have done well, Leora, but the darkness has not been vanquished. The creature has been weakened, but it will return, stronger and more dangerous than before. We must prepare for the battles to come." Leora nodded, her resolve hardening. The Ophiophaga had survived this night, but the war for the Whispering Pines was far from over. The ancient darkness had been unleashed, and its full power had yet to be revealed. As the blood moon began to wane, Leora looked up at the sky, the weight of the prophecy heavy on her shoulders. The Ophiophaga were the guardians of the forest, and they would fight to protect it no matter the cost. But as she stared into the darkening sky, a nagging thought gnawed at the back of her mind. What if the prophecy was not just a warning, but a message that they had yet to fully understand? The answers lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered in the nights to come. As the blood moon dipped below the horizon and the first light of dawn touched the Whispering Pines, a weary but triumphant Leora returned to the village with her companions. The Ophiophaga gathered around them, their eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. They had survived the night, but the sense of unease lingered like a dark cloud. Elder Thorn stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Leora. "You have done us proud," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But the shadows still cling to our land. The darkness may have retreated for now, but it is not gone." Leora nodded, the weight of the prophecy pressing down on her. She felt a strange pull in her chest, as if the forest itself was trying to communicate something to her, something urgent and terrifying. She tried to shake off the feeling, but it clung to her like a shadow. That night, after the village had settled into an uneasy sleep, Leora found herself drawn back to the heart of the forest. She moved silently through the trees, her senses heightened by the lingering tension in the air. The path seemed darker than before, the trees more twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. When she reached the clearing, she found it exactly as they had left it, peaceful, serene, the ancient tree standing tall at the center. But as she approached, the air grew cold, and a deep, primal fear settled in her bones. Leora hesitated, her eyes scanning the clearing. Something was wrong. The forest, usually so alive with the sounds of night, was deathly silent. She took a step closer to the tree, her heart pounding in her chest. Suddenly, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The bark of the ancient tree, once silver and luminous, was now blackened and cracked, as if it had been burned from within. The leaves, once shimmering with ethereal light, had turned a sickly, ashen gray. A faint, acrid smell of decay hung in the air. Leora's breath caught in her throat as she realized the truth. The rite of severance had not cleansed the forest. It had only driven the darkness deeper, into the very heart of the forest itself. As she stood frozen in horror, she heard a whisper, soft and insidious, drifting through the air like a cold breeze. It was a voice she recognized, the voice of the stranger. "You thought you could banish me, Ophiophaga," the voice murmured, its tone dripping with malice. "But you have only made me stronger. The heart of the forest is mine now, and through it, I will rise again." Leora stumbled back, her mind racing. The stranger's words echoed in her ears, filling her with dread. The darkness had not been defeated, it had been reborn, hidden deep within the very thing they had sought to protect. As she turned to flee, she heard a rustling behind her. She whipped around, her heart in her throat, but saw nothing. The clearing was empty, yet she felt the presence of something malevolent watching her from the shadows. The forest, once their sanctuary, had become a prison. Leora ran, the branches clawing at her as she raced back to the village. The trees seemed to close in around her, their once familiar shapes twisting into nightmarish forms. The path she had known all her life was now a labyrinth of shadows and fear. When she finally burst into the village, gasping for breath, she found the Ophiophaga gathered in the center, their faces pale with fear. They had felt it too, the shift in the forest, the dark power stirring beneath their feet. Elder Thorn met her gaze, his eyes filled with a terrible understanding. "The forest is lost," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The darkness has taken root in the heart of the whispering pines. We cannot fight it, Leora. We can only run." But as Leora looked around at the faces of her people, she knew it was too late. The darkness had already begun to spread. The ground beneath them pulsed with a faint, sickly light, the same blackened glow that had tainted the ancient tree. The shadows lengthened, creeping toward the village like a living thing. There was no escape. The forest had claimed them, and the darkness was rising. As the first tendrils of shadow reached the edge of the village, Leora felt a cold hand close around her heart. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the core, that this was the end. The prophecy had been fulfilled, but not in the way they had hoped. The Ophiophaga were not the saviors of the forest, they were its final sacrifice. The last thing Leora saw, as the shadows engulfed her, was the blood moon, rising once more over the treetops, its crimson light staining the sky. The darkness whispered her name, and she surrendered to it, knowing that the forest would never let them go. And deep within the heart of the whispering pines, the ancient darkness stirred, its hunger insatiable, its power growing. The Ophiophaga civilization, once mighty and proud, was no more than a memory, lost to the shadows that now ruled the forest. But the whispering pines still stood, a monument to the secrets buried within its depths, and those who ventured too close would hear the whispers of the lost, the cries of the fallen, and the laughter of the darkness that had claimed them all. The forest was alive, but it was no longer theirs. It belonged to the darkness now, and the darkness was hungry.